Mind your step on the damp moss as we slip into the cooling shadows of a Victorian garden. A place where the mist clings to the hedges and the air is so thick with the scent of damask roses and lavender you can almost taste the quiet. You're wrapped in layers of starched linen and unyielding whalebone, trying to maintain a dignified composure while your heart is doing a frantic tap dance because someone just handed you a single yellow carnation. And in this world of silent signals, that isn't a romantic gesture. It's a polite way of saying they find you utterly disappointing. It's a minefield of petals and social peril, where every nosegay is a whispered secret you aren't supposed to hear out loud. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this evening. Not without accidentally insulting 3 elderly aunts, or inadvertently proposing to a complete stranger, simply by holding your bouquet at the wrong angle. So, before the scandal breaks and we're exiled to the countryside, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy wandering through these old gardens with me. And do drop a comment with your location and local time. It's a lovely thing to imagine this same soft, drowsy night stretching across the globe as we all settle in together. Now dim those lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the cobblestone streets of 1717 Constantinople, the air thick with spice and rosewater, as Lady Mary Wortley Montagu watches Ottoman women exchange small, meaningful gifts wrapped in silk. She notices something peculiar, a tulip tucked into a sash, a sprig of jasmine passed between gloved hands, each gesture carrying a weight of meaning that needs no words. This is the selam, a silent language of objects and flowers that allows conversation without speech, and Lady Mary, ever the keen observer, scribbles notes in her journal with ink-stained fingers. You can almost smell the paper, feel the scratch of her quill, as she imagines bringing this delicate code back to the stiff, gossip-hungry parlours of England. Historians still argue whether Lady Mary fully understood the complexity of the salam, or simply romanticised a fragment of it for her English audience. But one thing is certain, her letters home planted a seed that would bloom into a full-blown Victorian obsession. You settle into a plush armchair in a London drawing room, decades later, and watch as young women pore over illustrated guides to floral meaning, their fingers tracing the delicate engravings of roses and violets. The idea Lady Mary carried from the East has taken root, but it's changing, adapting to the rigid social rules of British society. In the Ottoman tradition, the salam could include fruits, ribbons, even small trinkets, each with symbolic weight, but the English version narrows its focus almost exclusively to flowers. It's a curious shift, and one quirky fringe theory suggests this narrowing happened because flowers were easier to cultivate in England's temperate climate, making the language more accessible to the average household. You can almost hear the soft rustle of petticoats as ladies practice arranging bouquets, learning which blooms signal admiration, which whisper rejection, and which, like the humble marigold, might accidentally declare your despair if you're not careful. You notice how Lady Mary's own life mirrors the tension between expression and restraint that would come to define Victorian floriography. She was a woman who wrote boldly about her travels, who defied expectations by learning Turkish and documenting a culture few English women ever saw, yet she still had to navigate a society that valued silence and subtlety in matters of the heart. The selam she observed offered a way to communicate without breaking decorum, a loophole in the strict etiquette that governed every glance and gesture. And as you watch the idea travel from her journals to the printed page, you can feel the quiet excitement building. The promise of a secret language that could let you say everything you're not supposed to say, as long as you know which flower to pick. You turn the page of an old letter, imaginary ink smudging under your fingertip, and read Lady Mary's description of a young Ottoman woman using a bouquet to decline a suitor without a single awkward word. It's elegant, efficient, and utterly revolutionary for a society where a misplaced compliment could ruin a reputation. The mainstream historical record credits Lady Mary with introducing the concept of floral symbolism to England. But the truth is a bit messier, a bit more human. She didn't invent the language. She translated a feeling, a longing for a way to speak the unspeakable, and that translation resonated with a culture already primed for coded communication. You can almost hear the soft clink of teacups as the idea spreads, whispered from one drawing room to the next, a secret that's not quite a secret anymore. And as the sun sets over London, casting long shadows through lace curtains, you feel the weight of all those unspoken words waiting to be carried on petals. The journey from Constantinople to Kensington is complete, but the real story is just beginning. The moment when a simple garden becomes a dictionary, and every bloom holds the power to break a heart or mend one. You settle deeper into your chair, the fan humming softly in the background, as the silent language of flowers prepares to take root in the Victorian imagination. You flip open a delicate leather-bound volume from 1819, the pages soft as moth wings under your fingertips, and there it is, Le Langage des Fleurs by Charlotte de la Tour, the book that would turn scattered garden gossip into a proper domestic reference. You can almost smell the faint lavender of aged paper, feel the slight resistance as you turn each illustrated page, discovering that a simple sprig of rosemary isn't just for roast lamb, it's for remembrance, for loyalty, for a love that refuses to fade. This isn't just a gardening guide, it's a decoder ring for the heart, and suddenly every bouquet in every London parlour holds a secret waiting to be deciphered. Mainstream historical records show that de la Tour's manual was among the first to systematically assign meanings to hundreds of flowers, creating a standardized vocabulary that spread like pollen through Victorian households. You settle into the rhythm of it, learning that a white violet means innocence, while a purple one whispers thoughts of love, and you realize how perfectly this fits a society that values subtlety over directness. You imagine a young woman in a high-collared dress, sitting by a frosted window, practicing the art of floral composition with the seriousness of a scholar. She's not just arranging pretty things, she's composing sentences, paragraphs, entire emotional narratives using stems and petals. The book becomes her companion, its pages dog-eared from frequent use, its illustrations studied like sacred texts. And here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some historians suggest that Charlotte de la Tour might not have been a real person at all, but a pseudonym for a group of French writers capitalizing on the growing English fascination with floral symbolism. Whether she was one woman or many, the effect was the same, a foundational text that gave structure to the silent language Lady Mary had glimpsed decades before. You can almost hear the soft scratch of a pen as Victorian ladies copy entries into their own journals, personalizing the code for their own secret conversations. You notice how the dictionary format transforms something whimsical into something respectable. Instead of relying on oral tradition or scattered folklore, now there's an authoritative source, a reference you can consult when you're unsure whether to send lilies or laurels. The book organizes flowers alphabetically, making it easy to look up meanings quickly, a practical design for a society that values efficiency even in romance. Historians still argue whether de la Tour's assignments were based on genuine folklore, classical mythology, or simply her own poetic inventions, but that ambiguity is part of the charm. You can pick up the book, find a flower that suits your mood, and suddenly you're part of a grand tradition, whether that tradition is ancient or freshly invented. The uncertainty doesn't diminish the power, it enhances it, making each floral message feel like a personal discovery. You trace the illustration of a simple daisy with your finger, learning that it means innocent love, or I'll never tell, and you smile at the cleverness of it. In a world where a young woman might be chaperoned at every turn, where a direct declaration could ruin her reputation, a daisy tucked into a letter or pinned to a bodice becomes a safe way to speak your heart. The dictionary doesn't just list meanings, it offers guidance on how to combine flowers for more complex messages, turning bouquets into paragraphs, nosegays into love letters. You can almost feel the excitement of mastering this code, the thrill of sending a message that only the intended recipient can fully understand. It's intellectual, it's romantic, and it's perfectly proper, a trifecta that ensures its popularity across drawing rooms from Bath to Edinburgh. You settle deeper into the narrative, noticing how the book's influence extends beyond romance. A sprig of oak leaves means bravery, useful for encouraging a brother off to war. A branch of olive signifies peace, perfect for mending a family quarrel. The language of flowers becomes a tool for all kinds of communication, a way to navigate the complex social landscape of the Victorian era without ever raising your voice. And here's the gentle irony. A system designed for subtlety becomes so popular that it's almost commonplace, a secret that everyone knows. You can imagine the slight panic of realizing that your carefully crafted bouquet might be misinterpreted if the recipient has a different edition of the dictionary, or if they're using a competing guide. The fringe theory about multiple authors behind Charlotte de la Tour starts to make sense. Perhaps the confusion was built in from the start, a way to keep the language flexible, adaptable to personal interpretation. You feel the weight of the book in your hands, imaginary though it may be, and appreciate how it democratizes floral symbolism. Before this, knowledge of flower meanings might have been passed down through families or learned through expensive tutors, but now any middle-class household, with a few shillings to spare, can own the manual. You can almost hear the soft rustle of pages turning in homes across England, the quiet murmurs as families practice their floral vocabulary together. It's a communal activity, a parlour game with real emotional stakes, and you're part of it now, learning the code alongside generations of Victorians who found freedom in restriction. The book doesn't just teach you what flowers mean. It teaches you how to think in symbols, how to layer meaning beneath the surface of everyday interactions. And as the candlelight flickers over the illustrated pages, casting dancing shadows of roses and violets on the wall, you feel the quiet power of this silent language taking hold. The dictionary has transformed Lady Mary's exotic observation into a domestic tool, a way to navigate the intricate dance of Victorian social life with grace and subtlety. You close the book gently, the soft thud of the cover a period at the end of a sentence, and prepare to carry this knowledge into the next part of the journey, where the mechanics of the tussie-mussie will show you how to put theory into practice, one carefully chosen bloom at a time. You find yourself in a sunlit conservatory, the air warm and damp with the scent of soil and blooming jasmine, as you carefully dissect a pressed specimen with delicate tweezers. Your fingers, gloved in fine cotton, handle the fragile petals with reverence, noting the arrangement of stamens, the curve of the pistil, the subtle gradient of colour from base to tip. This isn't just gardening, this is science, and in the Victorian era, that distinction makes all the difference. You're not merely admiring beauty, you're studying anatomy, classification, reproduction, and because it's framed as botanical inquiry, it's perfectly proper for a lady to spend hours bent over a microscope, her hair pinned neatly, her dress protected by a crisp apron. Mainstream historical records show that the Victorian obsession with natural history created a unique space where women could engage in intellectual pursuit without threatening social norms, and the language of flowers fits seamlessly into this acceptable framework. You can almost hear the soft tick of a carriage clock on the mantel as you label your specimen, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowledge that's both useful and decorative. You notice how the same flowers that carry romantic meanings in your dictionary are also subjects of serious scientific study. The rose you might use to signal passion is also a complex organism with intricate reproductive structures, and understanding its biology adds another layer of appreciation to its symbolic weight. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian women's botanical journals contain not just scientific observations, but also coded personal entries, using flower illustrations as a private diary system that only the initiated could read. A sketch of a wilting lily might mark a day of sorrow, while a vibrant cluster of violets could celebrate a secret joy, turning the study of botany into a dual-purpose practice of both science and self-expression. You can almost feel the weight of that double meaning as you press a petal between the pages of your own journal, knowing that future eyes might see only a botanical specimen while you remember the moment it was gathered. You settle into the rhythm of this proper pastime, learning the Latin names alongside the symbolic ones, and you appreciate how the two systems complement each other. Rosa gallica might be the scientific designation, but in the language of flowers, it carries meanings of love and beauty that transcend taxonomy. Historians still argue whether the Victorian emphasis on botanical study for women was genuinely empowering, or simply a way to keep feminine intellectual energy contained within socially acceptable boundaries. But either way, it created a generation of women who were knowledgeable, observant, and skilled in the art of reading both nature and nuance. You can almost hear the soft rustle of pages as you consult both your scientific manual and your floral dictionary, cross-referencing facts and feelings in a way that feels uniquely Victorian, practical yet poetic, structured yet sentimental. You trace the veins of a leaf with your fingertip, marveling at the complexity of something so seemingly simple, and you understand why this study was so captivating. In a world where women's roles were often narrowly defined, botany offered a realm of discovery that was both expansive and respectable. You could travel the world through plant specimens, learn about distant cultures through their flora, and still remain firmly within the parlour, your reputation intact. The language of flowers benefited from this scientific interest, as the detailed study of plant characteristics made the assignment of symbolic meanings feel more authoritative, more grounded in observable truth. You can almost feel the excitement of connecting a flower's physical traits to its emotional symbolism. The thorny stem of a rose reflecting the pain of love, the delicate droop of a lily of the valley suggesting the return of happiness. You notice how the tools of botanical study become extensions of the floral language itself. A pressed flower in a journal isn't just a specimen, it's a message preserved in time. A carefully labelled collection isn't just a scientific record, it's a vocabulary built petal by petal. And here's the gentle irony. The same society that restricts women's direct expression encourages them to become experts in a language of indirect communication. You can almost hear the soft clink of glass jars as you store your specimens, the careful labelling in neat script, the quiet pride in a collection that's both scientifically sound and emotionally resonant. The fringe theory about coded diary entries starts to feel less like fringe and more like a natural extension of a culture that valued layers of meaning. You settle deeper into the conservatory's warmth, the hum of bees outside the glass a soft soundtrack to your study, and you appreciate how this pursuit blends intellect with intuition. You're not just memorizing meanings, you're learning to observe, to analyze, to interpret, skills that serve you well in navigating the complex social landscape of Victorian life. The language of flowers becomes more than a parlour game. It becomes a framework for understanding the world, one where every bloom has a story, every arrangement a sentence, every bouquet a conversation. You can almost feel the weight of that responsibility, the care required to choose the right flower, to arrange it just so, to send a message that's clear to the intended recipient but opaque to the casual observer. And as the afternoon light slants through the conservatory glass, casting long shadows of leaves and petals across your work table, you feel the quiet satisfaction of knowledge that's both personal and shared. The scientific study of botany has given you the tools to understand flowers in a new way, and the language of flowers has given those scientific facts emotional resonance. You close your journal gently, the soft rustle of pages a whisper of all the secrets it holds, and prepare to carry this dual knowledge into the next part of the journey, where the rigid social etiquette that made this silent language necessary will show you why every petal, every placement, every gesture matters so much in a world where words can be dangerous. You step into a crowded ballroom, the air thick with perfume and unspoken tension, and you feel the weight of every glance, every restrained gesture, every carefully measured word. Your hands are clasped neatly in your lap, your smile practiced and polite, but your heart is racing because across the room, someone you're desperately trying not to stare at is holding a small bouquet, and you're almost certain those blue violets mean faithfulness, but you can't be sure, and you certainly can't ask. This is the polite cage of Victorian society, where direct expression of romantic interest is not just frowned upon, but potentially ruinous, and where a single misplaced compliment could tarnish a reputation beyond repair. Mainstream historical records show that Victorian courtship rituals were governed by an intricate web of rules. Chaperones were mandatory, physical contact was strictly limited, and verbal declarations of affection were reserved for the most formal of proposals, delivered only after extensive familial approval. You can almost feel the constriction of your corset as you navigate this landscape, Understanding why a silent language of flowers wasn't just charming, it was essential. You notice how every interaction is layered with meaning that has nothing to do with the words being spoken. A fan fluttered too quickly might signal distress. A glove left behind could be an invitation, and a flower, carefully chosen and strategically placed, becomes one of the few safe ways to communicate genuine emotion without breaking decorum. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some social historians suggest that the elaborate rules of Victorian etiquette actually created a more intense romantic experience because the restriction forced people to pay closer attention to subtle cues, making every glance, every gesture, every floral message feel more significant than it might in a more permissive society. You can almost hear the soft rustle of silk as a young woman adjusts her bouquet, knowing that the placement of a single sprig of ivy, meaning fidelity, could reassure a suitor without a single risky word. You settle into the rhythm of this constrained world, learning to read the spaces between words, the pauses in conversation, the careful choreography of a dance that keeps bodies at a respectable distance while allowing eyes to speak volumes. The language of flowers fits perfectly into this system because it offers a way to be both expressive and proper, to say "I adore you" without actually saying it, to reject a suitor without causing a scene. Historians still argue whether this system of indirect communication actually protected young people or simply created more opportunities for misunderstanding and heartache. But either way, it shaped an entire culture's approach to romance. You can almost feel the tension of crafting a message that's clear enough to be understood by the intended recipient, but vague enough to be deniable if intercepted by a chaperone or gossip. You trace the edge of your own K with a gloved finger, considering the weight of each choice. A red camellia means you're a flame in my heart, but it's also bold enough to raise eyebrows if noticed by the wrong person. A sprig of white heather offers protection, a safe sentiment that could be interpreted as friendly or romantic, depending on the context. You appreciate the delicate balance required, the way a single bouquet can hold multiple layers of meaning, allowing you to test the waters without committing to a declaration that can't be taken back. And here's the gentle irony. The same society that restricts direct expression encourages elaborate indirect communication, creating a culture where people become experts in nuance, in subtlety, in the art of saying everything without saying anything at all. You notice how the rules vary by context, adding another layer of complexity to an already intricate system. A flower offered in a public ballroom carries different weight than one passed in a private garden. A bouquet presented by a gentleman to a lady has different implications than one exchanged between female friends. You can almost hear the soft murmur of conversation as you navigate these nuances, learning that timing, placement, and even the condition of the flowers matter as much as their symbolic meanings. A wilted bloom might signal fading affection, while a perfectly fresh one suggests enduring interest. A flower given at the beginning of an evening sets a different tone than one offered as a parting gesture. The fringe theory about etiquette creating more intense romance starts to feel plausible as you experience the heightened awareness that comes from having to communicate within such strict boundaries. You settle deeper into the understanding that this system isn't just about romance, it's about survival in a social world where reputation is everything. A young woman who misreads a floral message might encourage a suitor she doesn't intend to marry, leading to awkward confrontations and potential scandal. A gentleman who sends the wrong flower might accidentally declare his undying love to someone he merely finds pleasant company. You can almost feel the pressure of getting it right, the careful consideration that goes into every floral selection, every arrangement, every gesture. The language of flowers becomes a social skill as important as dancing or conversation, a way to navigate the complex terrain of Victorian relationships with grace and discretion. You notice how the polite cage, for all its restrictions, also creates moments of profound intimacy. When two people share an understanding of the floral code, a single exchanged bloom can carry the weight of a sonnet. A glance at a bouquet can confirm a feeling that words could never safely express. You can almost hear the soft intake of breath as a message is received and understood, the quiet thrill of connection that happens without a single spoken word. And here's the scholarly debate that lingers. Some historians argue that this system ultimately empowered individuals by giving them tools for subtle communication, while others contend it reinforced oppressive social structures by making direct honesty impossible. You can feel both truths as you hold your bouquet, appreciating the freedom it offers within the constraints, the way it lets you speak your heart while keeping your reputation intact. And as the evening winds down, the candlelight flickering over the carefully arranged flowers in every hand, you feel the quiet power of this silent language taking root in your own understanding. The polite cage hasn't disappeared, but you've learned to move within it with more confidence, to use the tools available to express what matters most without breaking the rules that keep you safe. You step out into the cool night air, the scent of your bouquet, a gentle reminder of all that was said without words, and you prepare to carry this knowledge forward into a world where the mechanics of the tussie-mussy will show you how to put this delicate code into practice, one carefully chosen, strategically placed bloom at a time. You lift a small, intricately arranged bouquet to your nose, the delicate fragrance of rose geranium and lavender wrapping around you like a comforting shawl, and you realize this isn't just a pretty accessory, it's a communication device. Compact enough to fit in your gloved palm, yet powerful enough to carry messages that could alter the course of a relationship. This is the tussie-mussy, also known as a nosegay, and in Victorian society, leaving home without one is like stepping onto a stage without your lines. You can almost feel the cool metal of the silver holder against your fingertips, the slight resistance as you adjust the mossy base that keeps your chosen blooms fresh throughout the evening's social maneuvers. Mainstream historical records show that tussie-mussies were considered essential for any respectable Victorian woman making a social call, attending a ball, or even taking a promenade in the park, serving both practical purposes, masking less pleasant urban odours, and social ones, acting as a portable vocabulary of emotion. You settle into the rhythm of selecting your flowers for the day, knowing that each stem you add is a word in a sentence only the initiated can fully read. You notice how the construction of a tussie-mussy is itself a language. The outer ring of fragrant herbs like mint or lemon balm isn't just for scent. It's a frame that contains and contextualizes the central message flower. A single red rose at the center, surrounded by ivy for fidelity and sprigs of rosemary for remembrance, creates a layered declaration that's far more nuanced than any single bloom could manage alone. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian florists offered emergency tussie-mussy kits for young gentlemen who needed to quickly compose an apology bouquet after a social misstep, complete with pre-selected flowers and a tiny instruction card to avoid sending the wrong message. You can almost hear the soft rustle of tissue paper as these kits were assembled. The careful placement of each stem to ensure the recipient would understand the intended sentiment without confusion. You settle deeper into the experience of carrying your tussie-mussy through a crowded London street, the bouquet acting as both shield and signal. When conversation becomes too forward, you can raise the nosegay to your lips, a gesture that politely creates distance, while also giving you a moment to consider your next floral move. When you wish to encourage a particular admirer, you might let the bouquet rest slightly lower, allowing the central bloom to be more visible, more accessible to the observant eye. Historians still argue whether the tussie-mussy was primarily a tool of female empowerment, a way for women to control romantic communication in a restrictive society, or simply another layer of social performance that added pressure to an already complex courtship ritual. You can feel both possibilities as you adjust your grip, appreciating the agency it offers while recognizing the careful calculation required to use it effectively. You trace the delicate lace doily that often surrounded the base of a tussie-mussy, noting how even the container contributes to the message. A simple paper cone might suggest casual friendship, while an ornate silver holder with engraved vines could signal serious romantic intent. The materials matter as much as the flowers, adding another dimension to the silent conversation. You can almost smell the faint metallic scent of the holder mixed with the floral perfume, a combination that becomes uniquely associated with Victorian social interactions. And here's the gentle irony. An object designed for subtlety becomes so ubiquitous that its absence speaks volumes. To appear in public without a tussie-mussie could be interpreted as carelessness, distress, or even a deliberate snub, making the bouquet not just an accessory but a social necessity. You notice how the tussie-mussie evolves with the seasons, reflecting both availability and appropriateness. Spring bouquets might feature delicate violets and lilies of the valley for youthful innocence, while autumn arrangements could include chrysanthemums for truth and marigolds for despair, allowing the language to shift with the calendar. You can almost feel the slight weight change as you swap out blooms, the different textures of petals and leaves under your gloved fingers, the way each arrangement requires its own careful handling. The fringe theory about emergency kits starts to feel less like a novelty and more like a practical response to a system where getting the floral message wrong could have real social consequences. You appreciate how the tussie-mussie democratizes floral communication to some extent. While elaborate arrangements might require professional assistance, even a simple posy of 3 carefully chosen flowers could carry a meaningful message. You settle into the ritual of preparing your tussie-mussie each morning, the quiet concentration of selecting blooms that reflect your intended communications for the day. A sprig of basil might find its way in if you're feeling particularly impatient with a persistent suitor. A cluster of white jasmine could signal amiability to a new acquaintance. You can almost hear the soft snip of scissors as you trim stems to the perfect length, the gentle tap as you arrange them in the holder, the satisfying click as you secure the lace collar. This daily practice becomes a form of meditation, a moment of intentionality in a world governed by strict social scripts. And here's the scholarly debate that lingers. Some historians suggest that the tussie-mussie actually increased social anxiety by adding another layer of potential miscommunication, while others argue it provided a valuable outlet for emotional expression in a restrictive culture. You can feel both truths as you hold your finished bouquet, appreciating the power it gives you while recognizing the responsibility that comes with it. You notice how the tussie-mussie bridges the gap between private feeling and public performance. In your home, you might arrange flowers simply for their beauty, but once you step into society, every bloom becomes a potential word in a public conversation. You can almost feel the shift in your posture as you transition from private to public space, the bouquet becoming an extension of your social self. The mainstream historical record shows that florists often provided consultation services to help customers compose appropriate tussie-mussies for specific occasions, turning floral arrangement into a professional skill that supported the broader social code. You appreciate how this system creates a shared vocabulary, a way for people to communicate complex emotions without violating the strict rules of Victorian decorum. And as you step out into the soft afternoon light, your tussie-mussie held just so, you feel the quiet confidence that comes from carrying a language in your hand. The bouquet isn't just decoration, it's preparation, protection, and possibility all at once. You can almost hear the gentle rustle of your skirts as you walk, the soft fragrance of your chosen blooms creating a personal atmosphere that travels with you. And you understand why this small accessory became so essential to Victorian social life. You settle into the rhythm of the street, your tussie-mussie a constant companion, and prepare to carry this knowledge forward into a world where the placement of a single bloom can change its meaning entirely, where the position of your bouquet on your person becomes as important as the flowers it contains. You adjust the small bouquet at your waist, feeling the slight prick of a rose stem through the fabric of your dress, and you realize that where you place your flowers matters just as much as which flowers you choose. A single red rose pinned near your heart doesn't just signal passion, it amplifies it, turning a general declaration of affection into a deeply personal confession that beats in time with your own pulse. But move that same rose to your hair, and suddenly the message shifts to admiration from afar, a compliment that's elegant but distant, safe for public consumption. You can almost feel the weight of that distinction as you experiment with placement in front of a looking glass. understanding that Victorian floral communication isn't just about vocabulary. It's about grammar, syntax, and punctuation, all determined by where you position your blooms. Mainstream historical records show that Victorian etiquette manuals often included detailed instructions on floral placement, with specific guidelines for different social contexts. A bloom at the wrist for friendship, one at the shoulder for romantic interest, and a cluster at the waist for general sociability. You notice how the body itself becomes a canvas for floral messages, with each zone carrying its own symbolic weight. Near the heart, flowers speak of deep emotion, of love and longing that can't be easily dismissed. In the hair, blooms suggest admiration, beauty, and a certain performative elegance that's meant to be seen but not necessarily acted upon. At the waist or hip, flowers become more social, more conversational, signaling approachability, without the intensity of heart-placed sentiments. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian fashion historians suggest that the popularity of bustles and crinolines wasn't just about silhouette. It created additional surface area for floral placement, allowing for more complex, multi-layered messages that could be read as a person moved through a room. You can almost hear the soft rustle of taffeta as a lady turns, revealing a hidden sprig of ivy tucked into the back of her bodice, a secret promise of fidelity meant only for the observant admirer who knows where to look. You settle into the subtle choreography of floral placement, learning that even the angle at which a bloom faces can alter its meaning. A flower turned outward, toward the world, might signal openness to conversation, while one angled slightly inward toward your body could suggest introspection or reserved affection. Historians still argue whether these placement rules were universally understood or varied significantly by region, class, and social circle. But either way, the possibility of nuanced communication through positioning added another layer of sophistication to an already complex system. You can almost feel the careful calculation as you pin a sprig of lavender to your collar, knowing that near your face it might suggest distrust or caution, but moved to your wrist it could simply mean devotion, a subtle shift that changes the entire tone of your message. You trace the path of a single stem from your hand to your heart, imagining the journey of a message as it travels through placement. A yellow carnation offered in the hand might signal disappointment, but once pinned near your heart, that same flower could transform into a bittersweet acknowledgement of faded affection, a more tender, personal sentiment. You appreciate how placement allows for emotional progression, for the evolution of a message as it moves from public gesture to private meaning. And here's the gentle irony. The same society that restricts direct expression encourages elaborate indirect communication through something as simple as where you stick a flower. You can almost hear the soft murmur of approval or confusion as your placement choices are interpreted by those around you, the quiet tension of hoping your message is received as intended. You notice how placement interacts with other elements of the floral code, creating a multi-dimensional language. A red rose near your heart means passionate love, but if that rose is accompanied by sprigs of yellow jasmine at your waist, the message becomes more complex. Perhaps a declaration of love tempered by caution, or passion balanced with friendship. You can almost feel the weight of these combinations as you arrange your bouquet, understanding that each placement decision affects not just the individual flower's meaning, but the overall narrative you're constructing. Fringe theory about fashion silhouettes, enabling more complex messaging, starts to feel plausible as you consider how the architecture of Victorian clothing created opportunities for layered floral communication. You settle deeper into the understanding that placement isn't just about romance. It's about navigating all kinds of social relationships. A sprig of white heather pinned at your shoulder might offer protection to a friend heading into a difficult situation, while the same flower at your wrist could signal general goodwill to a new acquaintance. You can almost hear the soft clink of jewelry as you adjust your placement, the careful consideration that goes into ensuring your floral messages align with your social intentions. Mainstream historical records show that Victorian women often carried small pins specifically for floral placement, allowing for quick adjustments as social contexts shifted throughout the day. a practical tool for a language that required constant calibration. You notice how placement rules could be subverted for playful or rebellious purposes. A young woman might deliberately place a flower in an incorrect position to create ambiguity, to test whether her intended recipient was knowledgeable enough about the code to understand the true message, despite the unconventional placement. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some social historians have found diary entries suggesting that certain rebellious Victorian youths developed their own counter-codes of placement, using deliberately misleading positions to communicate privately in plain sight. You can almost feel the thrill of that subtle rebellion, the quiet satisfaction of sending a message that only your chosen confidant could fully decipher. You settle into the rhythm of a society where every detail matters, where the difference between a bloom at your heart and one at your waist could mean the difference between acceptance and rejection, between encouragement and caution. You can almost feel the slight pressure of the pin against your dress as you secure a flower in its intended position, the quiet finality of that small action that carries such significant weight. Historians still argue whether this system of placement-based meaning actually facilitated clearer communication or simply added another layer of potential misunderstanding. But either way, it shaped how Victorians experienced and expressed emotion in their daily lives. And as you move through the afternoon's social engagements, your flowers positioned with careful intention, you feel the quiet power of this placement-based language. The same bouquet can tell different stories depending on where you wear it, allowing for flexibility and nuance in a world that often demanded rigid social performance. You can almost hear the soft rustle of your skirts as you turn, revealing different aspects of your floral message to different observers, and you appreciate the sophistication of a system that lets you communicate complex emotions without ever breaking the rules of decorum. You settle into the understanding that in Victorian society, where you place your feelings matters just as much as what those feelings are, and you prepare to carry this knowledge forward into a world where even the hand that offers a flower can change its meaning entirely, where a simple gesture of giving becomes another layer in the intricate code of floral communication. You extend your hand, palm up, a single white camellia resting delicately on your gloved fingers, and you feel the weight of the moment as the recipient's eyes flick from the flower to your hand to your face, reading not just the bloom but the gesture itself. If you offer it with your right hand, the message is clear. Yes, acceptance, encouragement, a green light for whatever sentiment the flower carries. But switch that same camellia to your left hand, and suddenly you're signaling no, rejection, a polite but firm boundary that can't be mistaken for coyness. You can almost feel the subtle tension in your wrist as you make this choice, understanding that in Victorian society, even the mechanics of giving carry meaning as potent as the gift itself. Mainstream historical records show that this right-hand yes, left-hand no convention was widely documented in etiquette guides and floral dictionaries, creating a standardized gesture code that worked alongside the symbolic language of the flowers themselves. You settle into the rhythm of this careful choreography, learning that every movement, every angle, every hand position becomes part of the conversation. You notice how this gesture code adds a layer of immediacy to floral communication. While the meaning of a flower might be debated or misremembered, the hand that offers it provides a clear, unambiguous signal that can't be easily misinterpreted. A red rose offered with the right hand is a confident declaration of love. The same rose offered with the left becomes a gentle but firm rejection, a way to acknowledge affection while declining its advance. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some social historians have found references to ambidextrous flirtation in Victorian diaries, where particularly clever individuals would deliberately switch hands mid-gesture to create playful ambiguity, keeping their admirers guessing about their true intentions. You can almost hear the soft laugh behind a fan as someone practices this subtle maneuver, enjoying the power of keeping multiple possibilities alive with a simple shift of the wrist. You settle deeper into the understanding that this hand-based code wasn't just about romance. It applied to all kinds of social exchanges. Offering a sprig of oak leaves with your right hand could signal enthusiastic support for a friend's endeavour, while the left-hand offer might suggest polite but reserved encouragement. Historians still argue whether this gesture system was universally practiced or primarily limited to certain social circles and regions. But either way, the possibility of adding gestural meaning to floral symbolism created a richer, more nuanced language of communication. You can almost feel the careful consideration as you decide which hand to use, weighing the social context, your relationship with the recipient, and the message you hope to convey. You trace the imaginary line from your shoulder to your fingertips, noticing how the entire arm becomes part of the message. A flower offered with a fully extended arm might signal formality or distance, while one presented with a slightly bent elbow could suggest intimacy or warmth. The angle of your wrist, the openness of your palm, even the speed of your gesture. All these elements combine with the hand choice to create a multi-dimensional signal. And here's the gentle irony. A system designed for subtlety becomes so codified that it risks becoming its own kind of performance, where people might focus more on executing the correct gesture than on the genuine emotion behind it. You can almost hear the soft rustle of gloves as people practice these gestures in private, rehearsing for the social stage where every movement is observed and interpreted. You notice how the hand code interacts with other elements of floral communication, creating layers of meaning that require careful navigation. A yellow rose, often signaling jealousy or decreased affection, offered with the right hand might suggest a willingness to work through difficulties, while the same flower offered with the left could signal a definitive end to romantic hopes. You can almost feel the weight of these combinations as you prepare your gesture, understanding that every element, from flower choice to hand selection to placement on the body, contributes to the overall message. The fringe theory about ambidextrous flirtation starts to feel less like a novelty and more like a natural extension of a culture that valued cleverness and subtlety in social interaction. You settle into the ritual of practicing these gestures, the quiet concentration of ensuring your hand position aligns with your intended message. You might rehearse in front of a mirror, adjusting the angle of your wrist, the openness of your palm, the speed of your extension, until the gesture feels natural yet intentional. Mainstream historical records show that some Victorian young people received informal coaching from older relatives or friends on the proper execution of floral gestures, turning social navigation into a skill that was learned and refined over time. You appreciate how this system creates a shared vocabulary of movement, a way for people to communicate complex intentions without violating the strict rules of Victorian decorum. You notice how the hand code could be used defensively as well as expressively. If someone offers you a flower with their left hand, you can politely decline without causing offense, simply by acknowledging the gesture's inherent rejection. If you're unsure of someone's intentions, you might observe which hand they use before deciding how to respond, giving yourself a moment to calculate your next move. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some etiquette manuals from the late Victorian period include warnings about deceptive gesturing, cautioning readers that not everyone follows the hand code faithfully, and advising vigilance in interpreting floral offers. You can almost feel the slight paranoia of wondering whether that left-handed offer is genuine rejection or a test of your knowledge of the code. You settle deeper into the understanding that this gesture-based layer of floral communication reflects broader Victorian values around restraint, subtlety, and the importance of reading between the lines. In a society where directness could be seen as crude or aggressive, the ability to communicate complex intentions through carefully calibrated gestures became a valuable social skill. Historians still argue whether this system ultimately empowered individuals by giving them tools for nuanced expression, or simply added another layer of anxiety to an already complex social landscape. But either way, it shaped how Victorians experienced and navigated their relationships. You can feel both truths as you practice your gestures, appreciating the agency it offers, while recognizing the careful calculation required to use it effectively. And as you move through the afternoon's social engagements, your floral offers calibrated with careful attention to hand position, you feel the quiet power of this gestural language. The same flower can tell different stories depending on which hand carries it, allowing for flexibility and precision in a world that often demanded indirect communication. You can almost hear the soft murmur of understanding or confusion as your gestures are interpreted by those around you, the quiet tension of hoping your message is received as intended. You settle into the rhythm of a society where even the mechanics of giving carry meaning, where a simple shift from right to left can change acceptance to rejection, encouragement to caution. You prepare to carry this knowledge forward into a world where even the orientation of a flower, handed upside down or right side up, can invert its meaning entirely, turning a tender compliment into a subtle insult with nothing more than a twist of the wrist. You feel the delicate weight of a single gardenia in your palm, its creamy petals soft as silk, its fragrance sweet and intoxicating, and you prepare to hand it to the person who's been catching your eye all evening. But instead of offering it stem down, petals up, as custom dictates, you subtly rotate your wrist, presenting the bloom upside down, and you watch as their expression shifts from pleasure to confusion to quiet understanding. That same gardenia, which normally means "you're lovely" or "secret love," now carries the inverted message: rejection, dismissal, a polite but unmistakable signal that your interest isn't reciprocated. You can almost feel the slight tension in the air as this silent reversal unfolds, understanding that in Victorian floral communication, even the orientation of a bloom carries weight as significant as its species or placement. Mainstream historical records show that this practice of inverting floral meaning through upside-down presentation was widely documented in Victorian etiquette guides, creating a built-in mechanism for delivering negative messages without the awkwardness of direct confrontation. You settle into the rhythm of this subtle power, learning that sometimes the most important thing you can say with a flower is what you don't want. You notice how inversion adds a layer of plausible deniability to floral rejection. If someone questions your intentions, you can always claim ignorance of the code, or suggest the flower simply slipped in your hand, a convenient escape hatch in a society where causing public embarrassment could damage reputations. A red carnation, normally signaling admiration and affection, becomes "alas for my poor heart" when inverted. A sprig of laurel, meaning glory or perseverance, transforms into beware when presented petals down. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian floral dictionaries included special symbols or annotations to mark flowers whose meanings were particularly sensitive to inversion, warning readers that certain blooms, like the delicate forget-me-not, could cause significant social confusion if accidentally handed upside down. You can almost hear the soft rustle of pages as someone double-checks their reference before an important social engagement, ensuring they don't accidentally insult someone while trying to compliment them. You settle deeper into the understanding that inversion wasn't just about rejection. It could also soften difficult messages or add nuance to complex emotions. A yellow rose, which already signals jealousy or decreased affection, might be handed right side up to emphasize the negative sentiment, or inverted to suggest a more tender, regretful acknowledgement of fading feelings. Historians still argue whether this inversion practice was universally understood, or primarily limited to certain social circles and regions, but either way, the possibility of flipping a flower's meaning created a sophisticated tool for emotional precision. You can almost feel the careful calculation as you decide whether to invert a bloom, weighing the social context, your relationship with the recipient, and the exact shade of meaning you hope to convey. You trace the imaginary axis of a flower from stem to petal, noticing how the entire orientation becomes part of the message. A bloom presented upright might signal confidence and clarity, while one offered inverted could suggest hesitation, regret, or a desire to soften the impact of the message. The angle of inversion matters too. A slightly tilted flower might indicate ambivalence, while a fully upside-down bloom delivers a more definitive statement. And here's the gentle irony. A system designed for subtlety becomes so codified that it risks becoming its own kind of performance, where people might focus more on executing the correct inversion than on the genuine emotion behind it. You can almost hear the soft murmur of conversation As people discuss the nuances of floral orientation, the quiet tension of hoping your inverted message is received as intended rather than mistaken for clumsiness. You notice how inversion interacts with other elements of floral communication, creating layers of meaning that require careful navigation. A sprig of ivy, meaning fidelity and friendship, handed right side up near your heart signals deep loyalty. But inverted and offered with the left hand, it might suggest a polite but firm end to a relationship. You can almost feel the weight of these combinations as you prepare your gesture, understanding that every element, from flower choice to hand selection to placement to orientation, contributes to the overall message. The fringe theory about special annotations in floral dictionaries starts to feel less like a novelty and more like a practical response to a system where getting the orientation wrong could have real social consequences. You settle into the ritual of practicing these inversions, the quiet concentration of ensuring your floral orientation aligns with your intended message. You might rehearse with cut blooms in private, experimenting with different angles and positions until the gesture feels natural yet intentional. Mainstream historical records show that some Victorian young people received informal coaching on the proper execution of inverted floral gestures, turning social navigation into a skill that was learned and refined over time. You appreciate how this system creates a shared vocabulary of orientation, a way for people to communicate difficult emotions without violating the strict rules of Victorian decorum. You notice how inversion could be used playfully as well as seriously. A young woman might invert a harmless flower like a daisy, meaning innocent love, just to tease an admirer, creating a moment of playful confusion that could either charm or frustrate depending on the recipient's sense of humor. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some social historians have found diary entries suggesting that certain Victorian flirtations involved deliberate inversion games, where participants would send mixed signals through carefully calibrated floral orientations, keeping the romantic tension alive through playful ambiguity. You can almost feel the thrill of that subtle game, the quiet satisfaction of keeping someone guessing through nothing more than the twist of a wrist. You settle deeper into the understanding that this inversion-based layer of floral communication reflects broader Victorian values around restraint, subtlety, and the importance of saving face. In a society where direct rejection could be seen as cruel or uncouth, the ability to deliver difficult messages through inverted flowers became a valuable social tool. Historians still argue whether this system ultimately facilitated kinder rejections or simply added another layer of anxiety to an already complex social landscape. But either way, it shaped how Victorians experienced and navigated their relationships. You can feel both truths as you practice your inversions, appreciating the agency it offers while recognizing the careful calculation required to use it effectively. And as you move through the evening's social engagements, your floral offers calibrated with careful attention to orientation, you feel the quiet power of this inverted language. The same flower can tell opposite stories depending on which way it faces, allowing for precision and protection in a world that often demanded indirect communication. You can almost hear the soft murmur of understanding or confusion as your inverted messages are interpreted by those around you, the quiet tension of hoping your subtle reversal is received as intended. You settle into the rhythm of a society where even the direction a flower faces carries meaning, where a simple twist can turn acceptance to rejection, compliment to caution. You prepare to carry this knowledge forward into a world where the secret dictionary of floral meanings will show you just how complex, nuanced, and sometimes surprisingly dark this silent language could become, one carefully chosen, strategically oriented bloom at a time. You hold a single rose between your gloved fingers, its petals soft as whispered secrets, and you realize this isn't just a flower, it's a chameleon of emotion, changing its meaning with every shift in hue, every variation in bloom, every subtle context of its offering. A deep crimson rose, velvety and rich, pressed near your heart, declares passionate love, a confession so bold it would scandalize if spoken aloud. But swap that same bloom for a pale pink rose, delicate and demure, and suddenly you're signaling grace, admiration, a gentle affection that respects boundaries. You can almost feel the weight of that distinction as you examine the spectrum of roses before you, understanding that in Victorian floriography, colour isn't just aesthetic, it's semantic, a coded language where every shade carries its own emotional vocabulary. Mainstream historical records show that Victorian floral dictionaries devoted extensive entries to the rose, recognizing it as the most complex and versatile symbol in the floral lexicon, with meanings that shifted dramatically based on colour, stage of bloom, and even the presence or absence of thorns. You notice how the rose's symbolism reflects the Victorian fascination with nuance and layered meaning. A white rose, pristine and pure, signifies innocence and youthful love, perfect for a young woman's first romantic gesture. But a white rosebud, still tightly closed, might suggest a heart not yet ready for love, or a secret admiration too fragile to fully reveal. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian florists developed specialized cultivation techniques to produce roses in very specific shades, knowing that even a slight variation in pink, from blush to coral, could alter the message from gentle admiration to grateful appreciation. You can almost hear the soft murmur of gardeners discussing soil composition and sunlight exposure, not just for beauty's sake, but for precision in emotional communication. You settle deeper into the rose's complex symbolism, learning that even the number of blooms matters. A single rose, regardless of colour, often signalled singular devotion or love at first sight, while a bouquet of roses could amplify or complicate the message depending on the arrangement. Historians still argue whether these nuanced distinctions were universally understood, or primarily the domain of the educated elite, who could afford extensive floral dictionaries and professional consultation. But either way, the possibility of such precision added depth to Victorian romantic expression. You can almost feel the careful calculation as you select a rose for a specific occasion, weighing not just the colour but the bloom stage, the stem length, the accompanying foliage, all contributing to the message you hope to convey. You trace the curve of a petal with your fingertip, noticing how the rose's physical characteristics often informed its symbolic meanings. The thorny stem, for instance, wasn't just a botanical feature. It represented the pain that can accompany love, the idea that beauty and danger often walk hand in hand. A rose without thorns, carefully cultivated or deliberately dethorned, might signal love without complications, or perhaps a desire to protect the recipient from emotional harm. And here's the gentle irony. The same flower that symbolizes passionate love could, in a different context, signal caution or even warning. A deep red rose offered with the left hand inverted becomes not a declaration of love but a polite rejection, a way to acknowledge affection while declining its advance. You can almost hear the soft rustle of petals as someone practices these nuanced gestures, understanding that the rose's power lies not just in its beauty but in its versatility. You notice how the rose's symbolism evolved with the Victorian era itself, reflecting changing social attitudes toward romance and expression. Early Victorian dictionaries might emphasize the rose's association with pure, idealized love, while later editions could include more complex meanings, reflecting the era's growing awareness of love's complications: jealousy, fading affection, unrequited devotion. Mainstream historical records show that the rose remained the most frequently referenced flower in Victorian floral dictionaries throughout the era, suggesting its enduring relevance as a symbol of emotional complexity. You appreciate how this botanical constant provided stability in a language that could otherwise feel overwhelming in its nuance and variation. You settle into the ritual of selecting the perfect rose for your intended message, the quiet concentration of matching color to emotion, bloom stage to timing, presentation to context. A coral pink rose might be just right for expressing gratitude to a friend who's offered support, while a deep magenta bloom could signal the beginning of a more serious romantic interest. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian diaries contain sketches of roses with handwritten notes about their intended meanings, suggesting that individuals sometimes personalized the standard dictionary definitions to create private codes within the broader public language. You can almost feel the intimacy of that practice, the way a shared understanding of a personalized floral vocabulary could deepen a relationship beyond what public conventions allowed. You notice how the rose's symbolism interacted with other elements of floral communication, creating layers of meaning that required careful navigation. A red rose accompanied by sprigs of ivy might signal passionate love tempered by fidelity, while the same rose paired with yellow jasmine could suggest affection complicated by caution or uncertainty. You can almost feel the weight of these combinations as you arrange your bouquet, understanding that every element contributes to the overall narrative you're constructing. The fringe theory about personalized rose meanings starts to feel less like a novelty and more like a natural extension of a culture that valued both shared conventions and private intimacy. You settle deeper into the understanding that the rose's complexity wasn't just about romance. It applied to all kinds of emotional expression. A white rose could offer sympathy in times of loss, a pink rose might celebrate a friendship, and a yellow rose, despite its later association with jealousy, originally signaled joy and friendship in many early Victorian dictionaries. Historians still argue whether the yellow rose's shift toward negative connotations reflected changing social attitudes toward friendship versus romance, or simply the natural evolution of symbolic language over time. But either way, it demonstrates how floral meanings weren't static but responsive to cultural currents. You can feel both truths as you consider your rose selection, appreciating the flexibility it offers while recognizing the responsibility that comes with wielding such a powerful symbol. And as you hold your chosen rose, its fragrance wrapping around you like a comforting embrace, you feel the quiet power of this nuanced language. The same flower can tell different stories depending on its color, its presentation, its context, allowing for precision and subtlety in a world that often demanded indirect communication. You can almost hear the soft murmur of understanding as your floral message is received and interpreted, the quiet satisfaction of knowing you've expressed something complex without ever breaking the rules of decorum. You settle into the rhythm of a society where even the most familiar bloom carries hidden depths, where a simple rose can hold the weight of passion, grace, jealousy, or any number of emotions depending on how you choose to present it. You prepare to carry this knowledge forward into a world where seemingly innocent flowers like lavender and yellow carnations carry surprisingly dark meanings, where the garden's beauty sometimes masks a thornier emotional truth. You pause before a cluster of lavender, its delicate purple spikes swaying gently in the conservatory breeze, and you might assume its calming fragrance and soothing color signal tranquility or devotion. But in the Victorian language of flowers, this seemingly innocent bloom actually whispers distrust, a subtle warning that not everything is as it appears. You can almost feel the slight chill that runs through you as you realize how easily a well-meaning gift could carry an unintended message, how a bouquet meant to comfort might actually convey suspicion or doubt. Mainstream historical records show that Victorian floral dictionaries consistently assign negative or cautionary meanings to several common garden flowers, creating a shadow lexicon that allowed Victorians to express difficult emotions without the social risk of direct confrontation. You settle into the rhythm of this darker vocabulary, learning that the garden wasn't just a place of beauty and romance. It was also a repository for jealousy, rejection, disdain, and other emotions too sharp to speak aloud. You notice how these negative meanings often reflected the flower's physical characteristics or folklore associations. Lavender, despite its pleasant scent, was sometimes linked to secrecy or hidden motives in Victorian symbolism, perhaps because its strong fragrance could mask other odours, or because it was traditionally used in protective charms that implied the need for defence. A yellow carnation, bright and cheerful to the eye, carried the surprisingly harsh meaning of disdain and rejection, a floral way to say, "I'm not interested," without uttering a single awkward word. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian gardeners reportedly avoided planting certain negative flowers near their front gardens, fearing that visitors might misinterpret their presence as a personal message rather than simple horticultural preference. You can almost hear the soft murmur of neighbourhood gossip as someone wonders whether that patch of yellow carnations in Mrs. Whitmore's border is a botanical choice or a subtle commentary on the last dinner party. You settle deeper into this shadow lexicon, learning that even flowers associated with positive emotions could carry darker alternate meanings depending on context. A marigold, often linked to creativity and passion, could also signal despair or grief in certain Victorian dictionaries, while a striped visually striking with its variegated petals, mint refusal or I cannot be with you. Historians still argue whether these negative associations were widely known and used, or primarily confined to specialized floral dictionaries consulted only by the most dedicated practitioners of floriography. But either way, their existence added a layer of complexity to Victorian social navigation. You can almost feel the careful consideration as you select blooms for a bouquet, weighing not just the beauty of each flower but the emotional weight it might carry, understanding that a single misplaced stem could transform a gesture of friendship into an unintentional insult. You trace the edge of a lavender sprig with your fingertip, noticing how its slender form and muted colour might have contributed to its association with caution or distrust. In a society that valued clarity in some contexts and subtlety in others, a flower that suggested uncertainty or hidden motives could be a valuable tool for expressing ambivalence without commitment. And here's the gentle irony. The same culture that prized honesty in moral matters encouraged elaborate indirect communication in social ones, creating a world where you could simultaneously value truth and rely on symbols to avoid speaking it directly. You can almost hear the soft rustle of pages as someone consults their floral dictionary, double-checking whether that sprig of tansy they're considering means sympathy or I declare war against you, a significant difference with potentially serious social consequences. You notice how these darker meanings weren't just about rejection. They could also express complex emotional states that defied simple categorization. Aconite, also known as monkshood, carried the ominous meaning of misanthropy, or beware, a deadly foe is near, reflecting both its beautiful appearance and its very real toxicity. Rhododendron, with its lush clusters of blooms, signaled danger or beware, perhaps because some varieties were known to be poisonous to livestock. Mainstream historical records show that Victorian floral dictionaries often included warnings about these potentially hazardous blooms, both in terms of their physical properties and their symbolic weight, creating a guide that was as much about social safety as botanical knowledge. You appreciate how this system allowed Victorians to navigate emotional complexity with a vocabulary that could express nuance without requiring vulnerable directness. You settle into the ritual of learning these darker meanings, the quiet concentration of memorizing which blooms carry cautionary messages. A sprig of basil, fragrant and culinary, might signal hatred or disgust in the floral lexicon, while a branch of cypress, often associated with mourning, could mean death or despair when used in a social context. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian etiquette guides reportedly included advice on how to politely deflect or respond to a bouquet containing negative flowers, suggesting phrases like, "How interesting that you chose lavender. I've always found its meaning so open to interpretation," as a way to navigate potential social landmines with grace. You can almost feel the relief of having a scripted response ready, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing how to handle a delicate situation without losing composure. You notice how the existence of these negative meanings actually enhanced the power of the positive ones. When a yellow carnation could signal disdain, the choice to send a red rose instead carried even more weight, a deliberate affirmation of affection in a world where rejection was always a floral possibility. Historians still argue whether this system of positive and negative floral meanings ultimately facilitated clearer emotional communication, or simply added another layer of anxiety to Victorian social interactions. But either way, it shaped how people expressed and interpreted feeling in their daily lives. You can feel both truths as you consider your floral selection, appreciating the precision it offers, while recognizing the careful calculation required to avoid unintended messages. You settle deeper into the understanding that these darker floral meanings reflected broader Victorian attitudes toward emotion and expression. In a culture that valued restraint and decorum, having symbolic ways to express difficult feelings, rejection, distrust, disdain, without causing public embarrassment was a valuable social tool The garden became a safe space to explore emotional complexity, where even the most painful sentiments could be expressed through the neutral medium of flowers. And here's the scholarly debate that lingers. Some historians suggest that this system actually protected vulnerable individuals by giving them non-confrontational ways to set boundaries, while others contend it reinforced oppressive social norms by making direct honesty impossible. You can feel both possibilities as you hold a sprig of lavender, appreciating the agency it offers while recognizing the complexity of a language where even beauty can carry a warning. And as you move through the conservatory, your eyes now trained to see beyond surface beauty to symbolic meaning. You feel the quiet power of this nuanced vocabulary. The same garden that offers roses for passion and violets for faithfulness also provides lavender for distrust and yellow carnations for rejection, creating a complete emotional lexicon that allows for the full spectrum of human feeling to be expressed without a single spoken word. You can almost hear the soft rustle of leaves as you consider your next floral choice, the gentle fragrance of blooms wrapping around you like a comforting yet cautionary embrace. You settle into the rhythm of a society where even innocence can carry hidden depth, where a seemingly simple bouquet might hold layers of meaning that require careful decoding. You prepare to carry this knowledge forward into a world where herbs and foliage like ivy and basil carry their own powerful messages, where the language of flowers extends beyond petals to include the very leaves and stems that support them. One carefully chosen, symbolically loaded sprig at a time. You run your gloved fingers along a trailing vine of ivy, its glossy leaves cool and waxy against your skin, and you realize this isn't just decorative greenery. It's a promise, a pledge of fidelity and friendship that carries as much weight as any bloom in your bouquet. In the Victorian language of flowers, herbs and foliage weren't mere accents. They were essential vocabulary, capable of reinforcing, complicating, or even contradicting the messages sent by petals alone. You can almost feel the subtle texture of each leaf as you consider its meaning. Ivy for steadfast loyalty, fern for sincerity, myrtle for love and marriage, each adding a layer of nuance that transforms a simple floral arrangement into a complex emotional sentence. Mainstream historical records show that Victorian floral dictionaries devoted significant space to non-floral elements, recognizing that the green framework of a bouquet often carried symbolic weight equal to its colorful centerpieces. You settle into the rhythm of this expanded vocabulary, learning that sometimes what surrounds the flower matters just as much as the flower itself. You notice how herbs in particular carried potent, sometimes surprising meanings that reflected their practical uses and folklore associations. Basil, that fragrant staple of kitchen gardens, didn't signal culinary delight in Victorian floriography. It meant hatred or disgust, a stark reminder that beauty and utility don't always align with emotional symbolism. A sprig of rosemary, often tucked into bouquets for its pleasant scent, carried the dual meaning of remembrance and fidelity, making it a popular choice for both romantic gestures and memorials. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian household manuals reportedly advised keeping basil plants in separate garden plots from positive flowers, fearing that its negative symbolic association might somehow contaminate nearby blooms through proximity. A botanical superstition that reveals just how seriously some people took the emotional weight of plant symbolism. You can almost hear the soft murmur of gardeners debating plot arrangements, the careful consideration given to which herbs should McKeeb which flowers, as if symbolic meanings could cross-pollinate through the soil itself. You settle deeper into the foliage lexicon, learning that even the structure and growth habit of a plant could inform its meaning. Ivy, with its tenacious cling and evergreen nature, naturally suggested fidelity and enduring friendship, while a branch of oak, strong and steadfast, symbolized bravery and moral fortitude. Historians still argue whether these associations were derived from genuine folklore, classical mythology, or simply the Victorian tendency to project human qualities onto the natural world. But either way, they created a rich symbolic language that extended far beyond traditional flowers. You can almost feel the weight of an oak leaf in your palm, its sturdy form reinforcing its meaning of strength. Understanding that in Victorian communication, Even the texture of a leaf could contribute to the message. You trace the serrated edge of a mint leaf, noticing how its refreshing scent and vigorous growth might have contributed to its association with virtue and warmth, while the delicate feathery fronds of fern suggested sincerity and humility. And here's the gentle irony. The same culture that prized ornamental flowers for their beauty also valued humble herbs and foliage for their symbolic power, creating a democratic element within an otherwise class-conscious system. You can almost hear the soft rustle of leaves as someone arranges a bouquet, carefully balancing colourful blooms with meaningful greenery, understanding that a sprig of ivy could reinforce a rose's declaration of love, or that a branch of cypress might soften the blow of a farewell bouquet. Mainstream historical records show that professional florists often consulted with clients about the symbolic meanings of foliage, treating herbs and leaves with the same careful consideration as roses and violets. You notice how foliage could serve as emotional punctuation in floral sentences. A cluster of ivy woven through a bouquet might emphasize the enduring nature of a sentiment, while a single sprig of basil, carefully placed, deliberately noticeable, could introduce a note of caution or even rejection without overwhelming the overall arrangement. You can almost feel the strategic thinking as you incorporate greenery into your composition, understanding that leaves aren't just filler, they're modifiers, adverbs and adjectives in the grammar of floriography. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian floral dictionaries included special sections on foliage combinations, suggesting that certain pairings of leaves could create compound meanings: ivy with oak for enduring strength, fern with myrtle for sincere love, allowing for even more nuanced emotional expression. You can almost hear the soft scratch of a pen as someone records these combinations in their personal journal, building a private reference guide for future bouquets. You settle into the ritual of selecting foliage for your arrangements, the quiet concentration of matching leaf to sentiment, texture to tone. A sprig of lavender might add both fragrance and a note of caution, while a branch of olive could signal peace and reconciliation. Historians still argue whether the average Victorian actually mastered this complex foliage vocabulary, or whether it remained primarily the domain of floral professionals and dedicated enthusiasts. But either way, its existence added depth to the era's approach to symbolic communication. You can feel both possibilities as you weigh your options, appreciating the precision foliage offers, while recognizing the learning curve required to use it effectively. You notice how herbs and foliage could bridge the gap between practical and symbolic, between the garden and the parlour. Rosemary, used in cooking and remembered for its association with memory, became a natural symbol for remembrance in floral communication. Sage, valued for its medicinal properties and wisdom-associated folklore, came to mean domestic virtue or good esteem in Victorian floriography. Mainstream historical records show that this blending of practical knowledge with symbolic meaning made floral language more accessible to people who might not have formal education but understood plants through everyday experience. You appreciate how this system created multiple entry points into floral communication, allowing both the scholarly and the practical to participate in the same symbolic conversation. You settle deeper into the understanding that foliage wasn't just about reinforcing flower meanings. It could also provide emotional counterpoint or complexity. A bouquet of bright, cheerful flowers accented with dark cypress leaves might signal joy tempered by mourning, or celebration acknowledging loss. A sprig of basil tucked subtly into an otherwise affectionate arrangement could introduce a note of ambivalence, a way to express mixed feelings without fully committing to rejection. And here's the scholarly debate that lingers. Some historians suggest that this foliage-based nuance actually empowered individuals by giving them tools for expressing complex emotions, while others contend it reinforced social anxiety by making every arrangement a potential minefield of misinterpretation. You can feel both truths as you consider your greenery choices, appreciating the agency foliage offers while recognizing the careful calculation required to avoid unintended messages. And as you move through the garden, your eyes now trained to see symbolic meaning in every leaf and stem, you feel the quiet power of this expanded vocabulary. The same hedge that provides privacy also offers ivy for fidelity. The same herb garden that flavors your meals also supplies basil for hatred, or rosemary for remembrance, creating a complete emotional lexicon that extends from petal to leaf. You can almost hear the soft rustle of foliage as you consider your next arrangement. The gentle fragrance of herbs wrapping around you like a comforting yet complex embrace. You settle into the rhythm of a society where even greenery carries hidden depth, where a seemingly simple sprig might hold layers of meaning that require careful decoding. You prepare to carry this knowledge forward into a world where combining different stems allows Victorians to send complex, multi-layered messages that could only be deciphered with a matching dictionary, where floral sentences become paragraphs and bouquets become entire conversations waiting to be read. You stand before a work table scattered with stems of every colour and texture, and you realise that selecting individual flowers is only the beginning. The real art of Victorian floriography lies in combining them, weaving separate symbols into a cohesive sentence that can express emotions too complex for any single bloom to carry alone. You pick up a red rose for passion, add a sprig of ivy for fidelity, tuck in a white violet for innocence, and suddenly you're not just sending flowers. You're composing a declaration. My passionate love is faithful and pure. You can almost feel the satisfaction of that syntactic precision, the quiet thrill of building a message that only someone with the right dictionary and the right attention to detail can fully decipher. Mainstream historical records show that Victorian floral dictionaries often included sections on compound meanings, guiding readers on how to layer symbols for more sophisticated communication, turning bouquets into paragraphs and nosegays into love letters that could be read petal by petal. You notice how the order of flowers in a bouquet could affect the reading, much like word order in a sentence. A red rose followed by ivy might emphasize passion grounded in loyalty, while ivy preceding the rose could suggest fidelity that has blossomed into love. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian florists reportedly offered sentence building consultations, where clients could dictate the message they wished to send, and a professional would compose the appropriate floral arrangement, complete with a written translation card for the recipient. Essentially a floral telegram service for those who wanted to ensure their botanical syntax was correct. You can almost hear the soft rustle of tissue paper as these custom bouquets were wrapped, the careful labelling that accompanied them, the quiet confidence of knowing your message would be received exactly as intended. You settle deeper into the mechanics of floral sentence construction, learning that certain flowers acted as emotional modifiers, while others served as the core subject or verb of your botanical statement. A sprig of lavender might introduce a note of caution to an otherwise affectionate arrangement, while a cluster of lilies of the valley could soften a message of farewell with the promise of happiness returning. Historians still argue whether these combinatorial rules were consistently applied across Victorian society, or varied significantly by region, class, and individual interpretation. But either way, the possibility of building complex messages through floral combination added remarkable depth to the era's approach to symbolic communication. You can almost feel the careful calculation as you weigh each stem, understanding that every addition changes the overall meaning, that a single misplaced bloom could transform a declaration of love into an expression of ambivalence. You trace the imaginary syntax of your bouquet, noticing how foliage often served as punctuation, ivy as a period, sealing a promise, fern as a comma adding a pause for sincerity, myrtle as an exclamation point celebrating love's joy. And here's the gentle irony. A system designed for subtlety becomes so elaborate that it risks becoming its own kind of performance, where people might focus more on constructing the correct floral sentence than on the genuine emotion behind it. You can almost hear the soft murmur of conversation as someone admires your arrangement, their eyes flicking from bloom to bloom as they mentally translate, the quiet tension of hoping your botanical grammar is received as intended. Mainstream historical records show that some Victorian young people practiced floral composition in private, rehearsing their botanical sentences before important social occasions, turning emotional expression into a skill that required both creativity and technical precision. You notice how combining flowers allowed for emotional nuance that single blooms couldn't achieve. A yellow rose, often signaling jealousy, paired with a pink camellia for longing and a sprig of oak for strength, might express, "I struggle with jealousy but remain strong in my longing for you," a complex sentiment that would be awkward or impossible to voice directly. You can almost feel the weight of that layered meaning as you arrange your stems, understanding that every combination creates a unique emotional fingerprint, a message tailored to a specific relationship and moment. The fringe theory about professional sentence-building consultations starts to feel less like a novelty and more like a practical response to a system where getting the floral grammar wrong could have real social consequences. You settle into the ritual of practicing these combinations, the quiet concentration of testing different arrangements to see how meanings shift with each adjustment. You might lay out your stems on a table, moving them into different sequences, observing how the overall message changes with each rearrangement until the composition feels just right. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian diaries contain sketches of bouquet arrangements with handwritten translations in the margins, suggesting that individuals sometimes treated floral composition as a form of private journaling, recording emotional states through botanical sentences that only they could fully decode. You can almost feel the intimacy of that practice, the way a personal floral vocabulary could become a safe space for processing complex feelings. You notice how the combinatorial aspect of floriography interacted with other elements of the code: placement, hand gesture, orientation, to create multidimensional messages. A bouquet combining red rose, ivy and white violet, pinned near your heart and offered with the right hand, delivers a powerful, unambiguous declaration of faithful, pure love. But invert the rose, switch to the left hand, and move the bouquet to your waist, and that same combination becomes something far more complex. Perhaps a polite acknowledgement of past affection, with a gentle but firm boundary for the future. Mainstream historical records show that advanced floral dictionaries sometimes included diagrams, showing how placement and gesture interacted with combination meanings, creating a comprehensive guide for those who wished to master the full complexity of the language. You settle deeper into the understanding that building floral sentences wasn't just about romance. It applied to all kinds of emotional and social communication. A bouquet of oak leaves for bravery, white heather for protection, and rosemary for remembrance might be sent to a friend departing for military service, offering encouragement, safety, and the promise of being remembered. Historians still argue whether this combinatorial system ultimately empowered individuals by giving them tools for precise emotional expression, or simply added another layer of anxiety to an already complex social landscape. But either way, it shaped how Victorians experienced and navigated their relationships. You can feel both truths as you practice your combinations, appreciating the agency it offers, while recognizing the careful calculation required to use it effectively. And as you hold your finished bouquet, its layers of meaning wrapped together in a delicate balance of color, texture, and symbol, you feel the quiet power of this combinatorial language. The same set of flowers can tell different stories depending on how you arrange them, allowing for precision and personalization in a world that often demanded indirect communication. You can almost hear the soft rustle of petals as your message is received and interpreted, the quiet satisfaction of knowing you've expressed something complex without ever breaking the rules of decorum. You settle into the rhythm of a society where even the arrangement of stems carries meaning, where a carefully composed bouquet becomes a conversation waiting to be read. One petal, one leaf, one intentional combination at a time. You prepare to carry this knowledge forward into the final part of our journey, where we'll explore how this floral craze spread through the middle class, fueled an industry, eventually faded with changing social norms, and still leaves traces in how we communicate with flowers today. You settle into a cozy middle-class parlor, the soft glow of gaslight flickering over wallpaper patterned with delicate vines, and you watch as a group of friends gathers around a small table scattered with floral dictionaries, pressed specimens, and half-finished bouquets. This isn't a scene of aristocratic excess or scholarly isolation. It's a Tuesday evening in a respectable household where the language of flowers has become not just a tool for romance but a popular intellectual pastime, a parlour game that lets everyone from shopkeepers' daughters to clerks' wives participate in the elegant dance of symbolic communication. You can almost feel the warmth of the room, the gentle murmur of conversation as someone reads aloud from a floral dictionary, the soft laughter when a particularly clever combination is deciphered, and you realize that floriography has democratized what was once an elite pursuit, turning the garden into a shared vocabulary for the growing Victorian middle class. Mainstream historical records show that by the mid-19th century, affordable editions of floral dictionaries were widely available, and the practice of arranging meaningful bouquets had become a common feature of middle-class social gatherings, as acceptable and expected as playing cards or performing parlour songs. You notice how the game-like aspect of floriography made it particularly appealing to middle-class Victorians eager to demonstrate refinement without the resources of the aristocracy. Learning the language of flowers became a marker of education and taste, a way to signal cultural capital without requiring expensive tutors or continental travel. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian middle-class households reportedly held floral quizzes as parlour entertainment, where guests would compete to decode the most complex bouquet arrangements or compose the most elegant floral sentences, with small prizes like ribbon bookmarks or handmade confections awarded to the winners. You can almost hear the soft rustle of paper as someone writes down their answer, the gentle clink of a teacup as the hostess announces the next challenge, the quiet pride of getting a difficult combination right. You settle deeper into the rhythm of this middle-class adoption, learning that the popularity of floriography as parlour entertainment actually helped standardize certain meanings across different social circles. When dozens of households are playing the same symbolic game, using the same widely available dictionaries, a consensus naturally emerges about which flowers mean what, creating a more unified language than might have existed if the practice had remained confined to elite or regional groups. Historians still argue whether this standardization actually enriched floral communication or diluted its nuance by favoring the most commonly accepted meanings over more complex or localized interpretations. But either way, the middle-class embrace of floriography helped cement its place in Victorian cultural life. You can almost feel the satisfaction of mastering a shared code, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can participate fully in a social ritual that spans class and region. You trace the edge of an affordable floral dictionary, its pages slightly worn from frequent use, and you appreciate how the mass production of these guides made symbolic literacy accessible to people who might never have owned a leather-bound reference volume. A shilling or two could buy you entry into the language of flowers, and that small investment paid dividends in social capital, romantic possibility, and intellectual enjoyment. And here's the gentle irony. A system that began as a tool for navigating the strictest social hierarchies became, through middle-class adoption, a force for cultural democratization, allowing people of modest means to participate in a sophisticated form of expression that once belonged to the elite. You can almost hear the soft scratch of a pen as someone copies entries into their own journal, personalizing the shared vocabulary for their own circle of friends and family. You notice how the parlour game aspect of floriography encouraged creativity and playfulness within the constraints of the code. Middle-class Victorians didn't just memorize meanings. They experimented with combinations, invented private variations for their own social circles, and enjoyed the intellectual challenge of composing and deciphering complex floral messages. Mainstream historical records show that women's magazines of the era frequently included columns on floral symbolism, offering tips for parlour games, suggesting new combinations, and even publishing readers' creative arrangements, turning floriography into a participatory cultural phenomenon. You appreciate how this media engagement helped sustain the practice's popularity, creating a feedback loop where public interest fueled more content, which in turn deepened public engagement. You settle into the ritual of a middle-class floral evening, the quiet concentration of composing a bouquet for a friend, the gentle excitement of presenting it and watching as they work to decode your message. A sprig of ivy for friendship, a pink rose for grace, a white violet for innocence, each choice deliberate, each combination a small act of creative expression. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian middle-class diaries contain records of floral scorecards, where individuals tracked their success in sending and receiving floral messages, noting which combinations were most effective, which meanings were most commonly misunderstood, and which friends were the most skilled decoders. You can almost feel the playful competitiveness of that practice, the quiet satisfaction of improving your floral literacy over time. You notice how the middle-class embrace of floriography as parlour entertainment actually helped preserve the practice even as its original romantic and social functions began to evolve. When a cultural practice becomes a game, it gains a kind of resilience. It can survive changes in the social conditions that gave rise to it, because people continue to enjoy it for its own sake. Historians still argue whether this gamification ultimately strengthened or weakened the emotional power of floral communication. But either way, it ensured that the language of flowers remained a vibrant part of Victorian life well beyond its initial utility. You can feel both possibilities as you participate in your own floral parlour game, appreciating the joy of the puzzle while recognizing that the stakes, romantic, social, emotional, haven't entirely disappeared. You settle deeper into the understanding that the middle-class adoption of floriography reflected broader Victorian values around self-improvement, intellectual engagement, and respectable entertainment. Learning the language of flowers wasn't just fun. It was edifying, a way to cultivate taste, knowledge, and social skills simultaneously. Mainstream historical records show that many middle-class families viewed floral literacy as part of a well-rounded education, especially for young women, who were encouraged to master the code as both a social asset and a creative outlet. You appreciate how this framing made the practice sustainable across generations, as parents passed down floral knowledge to children, not just as romantic lore but as cultural heritage. And as the evening winds down, the gaslight dimmed slightly, the floral dictionaries closed with soft thuds, the half-finished bouquets carefully preserved for tomorrow's social calls. You feel the quiet satisfaction of a pastime well enjoyed. The language of flowers has become more than a tool for courtship or a marker of elite status. It's a shared cultural practice that brings people together in creativity, intellectual challenge, and gentle play. You can almost hear the soft murmur of goodbyes as guests depart, bouquets in hand, already planning their next floral compositions, and you understand how this middle-class embrace helped carry floriography through the height of its popularity. You settle into the rhythm of a society where even leisure activities can carry meaning, where a parlour game can also be a form of cultural participation, and you prepare to carry this knowledge forward into a world where the demand for symbolic blooms would fuel the rise of professional florists and elaborate greenhouse culture, turning a parlour pastime into a commercial enterprise that changed how Britain grew, sold, and thought about flowers. You step onto a bustling London street in the 1850s, and the air carries a new scent, not just coal smoke and horse manure, but the sweet, delicate perfume of fresh-cut flowers spilling from shop fronts you've never noticed before. These aren't the informal stalls of flower sellers from decades past. These are proper florist shops, with gleaming windows displaying carefully arranged bouquets, each labelled with tiny cards indicating their symbolic meanings, ready to help you compose the perfect floral sentence for your afternoon call. You can almost feel the cool draft as you enter one of these establishments, the gentle rustle of tissue paper, as a professional florist selects blooms for your arrangement, their expert hands moving with the confidence of someone who understands not just horticulture, but the intricate grammar of floriography. Mainstream historical records show that the Victorian obsession with floral symbolism directly fueled the rise of professional floristry as a respected trade, creating a new class of merchants who were part botanist, part linguist, part romantic consultant, helping customers navigate the complex emotional landscape of Victorian society, one carefully chosen bloom at a time. You notice how these florists didn't just sell flowers, they sold expertise, offering consultation services that helped customers compose arrangements with precise symbolic intent. A young gentleman unsure how to express his growing affection might describe his feelings in halting terms, and the florist would translate that emotional vocabulary into botanical syntax. Red roses for passion, ivy for fidelity, white violets for innocence, all arranged in an order that emphasized the sincerity of his intentions. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian florists reportedly kept meaning ledgers alongside their stock records, noting which floral combinations were most popular for specific occasions. Engagements, apologies, farewells, essentially creating early market research on emotional communication trends. You can almost hear the soft scratch of a pen as a florist records that rose ivy violet bouquets saw increased demand following the royal engagement announcement, adjusting their inventory and advice accordingly. You settle deeper into the commercial ecosystem that grew around floral symbolism, learning that the demand for specific meaningful blooms didn't just create florists, it transformed horticulture itself. Greenhouse technology advanced rapidly during this period, not merely to extend growing seasons but to produce flowers in the exact shades and stages of bloom that carried the most precise symbolic meanings. A florist might need roses in 7 distinct shades of pink to accommodate the subtle variations in meaning between gentle admiration, grateful appreciation, and budding affection, and growers responded by developing specialized cultivation techniques to meet that demand. Historians still argue whether this commercial pressure actually enriched floral symbolism by encouraging greater precision or diluted it by prioritizing marketable simplicity over nuanced tradition. But either way, the relationship between florists and growers created an industry that was as much about emotional communication as it was about horticulture. You trace the imaginary path of a single bloom from greenhouse to parlor, noticing how the commercial infrastructure supported the cultural practice at every step. Railways enabled fresh flowers to travel from rural growers to urban florists overnight, ensuring that even Londoners could access blooms that carried regionally specific meanings. Telegraph services sometimes carried floral orders between cities, allowing someone in Edinburgh to commission a meaningful bouquet for a loved one in Bath, with nothing more than a coded message sent through the wires. And here's the gentle irony. A system designed for subtle, personal communication became so popular that it required industrial-scale logistics to support it, turning intimate gestures into commodities that could be ordered, packaged, and delivered with commercial efficiency. You can almost hear the soft clatter of crates as flowers arrive at the shop, the careful unpacking that ensures each bloom remains perfect for its symbolic purpose. You notice how professional florists became cultural intermediaries, helping to standardize and disseminate floral meanings across different social circles and regions. When a florist in Manchester recommends the same combination for a farewell bouquet as a florist in Bristol, that consistency helps create a more unified national language of flowers, even as local variations persist. Mainstream historical records show that florist trade publications of the era frequently included updates on symbolic meanings, new combinations, and customer preferences, creating a professional network that supported the broader cultural practice of floriography. You appreciate how this commercial infrastructure actually helped preserve and evolve the language of flowers, ensuring it remained vibrant and relevant even as social conditions changed. You settle into the ritual of consulting with a florist, the quiet concentration of describing your intended message, the gentle guidance as they suggest blooms you might not have considered. A sprig of myrtle for love, yes, but have you considered adding fern for sincerity to emphasize the genuineness of your sentiment? And here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Victorian florists reportedly offered meaning insurance, promising to replace any bouquet that was misinterpreted due to their faulty advice. A charming early example of customer service guarantees in an industry built on subjective interpretation. You can almost feel the relief of that promise, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing an expert stands behind your floral sentence. You notice how the rise of professional floristry also created new social opportunities, particularly for women. Floristry was one of the few respectable trades open to middle-class women in Victorian society, and many florist shops were owned and operated by women who brought both horticultural knowledge and social intuition to their work. Historians still argue whether this professional opportunity genuinely empowered women or simply extended traditional feminine domains into commercial spaces, but either way, it created a pathway for women to participate in the economy while working within socially acceptable boundaries. You can feel both possibilities as you imagine a female florist advising a young client, her expertise valued not just for its technical knowledge, but for its emotional intelligence. You settle deeper into the understanding that the commercial success of floristry both reflected and reinforced the cultural importance of floriography. When an industry grows around a practice, that practice gains legitimacy, visibility, and staying power. The fact that people were willing to pay professionals to help them compose floral messages suggests that the language of flowers wasn't just a passing fad but a meaningful part of Victorian social life. Mainstream historical records show that florist shops often served as informal social hubs, places where people gathered not just to buy flowers but to discuss meanings, share combinations, and participate in the broader cultural conversation about symbolic communication. You appreciate how commerce and culture intertwine to sustain a practice that might otherwise have remained confined to private journals and aristocratic parlours. You notice how the greenhouse culture that developed to support floral symbolism had lasting impacts beyond the Victorian era. The techniques developed to produce specific shades, bloom stages, and varieties for symbolic purposes advanced horticultural science in ways that benefited flower cultivation generally. The infrastructure built to transport delicate blooms quickly and carefully laid groundwork for the modern floral industry. And here's the scholarly debate that lingers. Some historians suggest that the commercialization of floriography ultimately weakened its emotional power by making meaningful bouquets available for purchase, rather than requiring personal cultivation and selection, while others contend that professional florists actually enhanced the practice by making sophisticated floral communication accessible to people without extensive botanical knowledge. You can feel both truths as you hold your professionally composed bouquet, appreciating the expertise that went into its creation, while wondering whether a personally gathered arrangement might have carried a different kind of meaning. And as you step back onto the street, your bouquet carefully wrapped in tissue paper, its symbolic message ready to be delivered, you feel the quiet power of an industry built on emotion. The florist's shop isn't just a place to buy flowers, it's a workshop of meaning, where commercial skill meets cultural knowledge to help people express what words cannot safely say. You can almost hear the soft rustle of paper as other customers receive their arrangements, the gentle murmur of consultation continuing behind you, and you understand how the demand for symbolic blooms transformed not just how Victorians communicated, but how Britain grew, sold, and valued flowers. You settle into the rhythm of a society where even commerce can carry meaning, where buying a bouquet can be an act of cultural participation, and you prepare to carry this knowledge forward into a world where changing social norms and new communication technologies would eventually make this elaborate floral code seem quaint, where the Edwardian era's embrace of directness would render the silent language of flowers a charming relic of a more restrained time. You feel the shift in the air as the new century turns, the crisp edge of Edwardian directness replacing the velvet subtlety of Victorian restraint, and you notice that the careful floral sentences you once composed now feel almost quaint, like wearing a corset to a bicycle ride. Technically possible, but increasingly impractical in a world that's moving faster, speaking louder, valuing clarity over code. You can almost hear the ring of a telephone cutting through the parlor silence, that revolutionary device that lets you speak your feelings directly across town, without translating them into petals and leaves, and you realize that the very conditions that made floriography necessary, strict chaperonage, limited privacy, the social risk of direct expression, are beginning to dissolve under the pressure of modernity. Mainstream historical records show that the Edwardian era brought significant shifts in social norms, women gained more freedom of movement, courtship rituals relaxed, and the emphasis on indirect communication gave way to a growing appreciation for honesty and efficiency in personal expression. You settle into the rhythm of this transition, understanding that the language of flowers isn't disappearing overnight, but its urgency, its necessity, is fading like the scent of a bloom left too long in the sun. You notice how new communication technologies accelerated the decline of floral symbolism. The telephone, patented in the late Victorian era but widely adopted in Edwardian homes, allowed for private, immediate conversation that made the slow, symbolic work of floriography seem almost indulgent. Why compose a bouquet to signal I miss you when you can simply pick up the receiver and say the words? Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some early telephone etiquette guides reportedly included warnings about floral holdovers, advising users not to describe bouquet arrangements over the phone as if the recipient could see them. A charming reminder of how deeply embedded floral language had become and how awkwardly it translated to new mediums. You can almost hear the soft crackle of an early telephone line as someone fumbles to explain their floral message verbally, realizing mid-sentence that the whole point was to avoid saying it directly. You settle deeper into the social changes that made floriography feel less essential. The women's suffrage movement challenged traditional gender roles, encouraging women to speak their minds directly, rather than encoding their thoughts in petals. As women gained more educational and professional opportunities, the need for subtle, indirect communication in romantic contexts diminished. When you can meet someone unchaperoned, when you can express interest without risking your reputation, the elaborate code of flowers starts to feel like an unnecessary complication. Historians still argue whether the decline of floriography was primarily driven by technological change, social reform, or simply the natural evolution of cultural tastes. But either way, the practice that once felt vital began to seem like a charming relic of a more restrained time. You can almost feel the lightness of that shift, the quiet relief of being able to say what you mean without translating it through a dictionary. You trace the fading relevance of floral dictionaries on middle-class bookshelves, noticing how they migrate from practical reference to decorative curiosity. Their pages consulted more for nostalgia than necessity. The parlor games that once centered on decoding bouquets now compete with new entertainments. Cinema, radio, motorcar excursions, all offering more immediate, less coded forms of engagement. And here's the gentle irony. A system designed to protect reputations by enabling indirect expression becomes less valuable as society becomes more forgiving of directness, as the stakes of a misplaced compliment decrease, as the fear of social ruin that once made floral code essential begins to feel like an artifact of a stricter age. You can almost hear the soft thud of a floral dictionary being moved from the writing desk to the decorative shelf, its practical purpose giving way to sentimental value. You notice how World War I accelerated the decline of elaborate social codes like floriography. The trauma of war, the loss of a generation, the rapid social changes that followed. All of these made the delicate nuances of floral symbolism seem almost trivial in the face of more urgent human concerns. When people are facing mortality, when relationships are tested by separation and uncertainty, the ability to speak directly, to say I love you or I'm afraid, without botanical translation, becomes more valuable than ever. Mainstream historical records show that floral symbolism didn't disappear entirely after the war, but its role shifted from essential social tool to occasional romantic gesture, a decorative flourish rather than a necessary vocabulary. You appreciate how crisis can reshape cultural practices, stripping away the non-essential to reveal what truly matters in human connection. You settle into the ritual of watching floriography transition from necessity to nostalgia, the quiet concentration of observing how a once vital language becomes a cultural artifact. A young Edwardian woman might still receive a bouquet of roses, but she's more likely to appreciate it for its beauty than to dissect its symbolic syntax. She might enjoy the romance of the gesture without feeling compelled to decode every stem. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some Edwardian etiquette manuals reportedly included brief sections on floral symbolism, labeled for historical interest. acknowledging the practice while gently suggesting that direct communication was now preferred. A polite way of saying, "This is charming, but you don't actually need to learn it." You can almost feel the gentle dismissal in that framing, the quiet acknowledgement that cultural practices have life cycles, and that even the most elaborate codes eventually give way to simpler forms of expression. You notice how the decline of floriography wasn't a sudden collapse but a gradual fading, like the softening of colours in an old photograph. Floral symbolism persisted in certain contexts: weddings, funerals, formal occasions, where tradition carried more weight than efficiency, but its everyday utility diminished as social norms evolved. Historians still argue whether this fading represented a loss of nuanced emotional expression, or simply an adaptation to changing social needs. But either way, the elaborate code that once allowed Victorians to say everything without saying anything gradually gave way to a culture more comfortable with directness. You can feel both truths as you observe the transition, appreciating the beauty of the old system while recognizing the practicality of the new. You settle deeper into the understanding that the end of floriography's dominance wasn't a rejection of its values, but a reflection of broader cultural shifts. The Victorian emphasis on restraint, subtlety, and indirect communication gave way to Edwardian, and later modern, values that prized authenticity, efficiency, and emotional honesty. The telephone didn't kill the language of flowers. It offered an alternative that better suited a fast, more direct age. Mainstream historical records show that floral symbolism never fully disappeared. It simply retreated to specific niches where its particular strength still mattered: romantic gestures, ceremonial occasion, artistic expression. You appreciate how cultural practices don't always vanish. Sometimes they just change shape, finding new roles in evolving social landscapes. You notice how the fading of floriography actually helped preserve its charm. When a practice is no longer necessary, it can be enjoyed for its aesthetic and nostalgic value, without the pressure of getting every detail right. A modern person might send red roses on Valentine's Day, not because they've consulted a Victorian dictionary, but because the gesture carries a romantic resonance that transcends its original symbolic precision. And here's the scholarly debate that lingers. Some historians suggest that the decline of elaborate floral codes actually impoverished emotional expression by removing tools for nuance, while others contend that direct communication, when done with care, can be just as subtle and meaningful as any coded system. You can feel both possibilities as you consider the transition, appreciating what was lost while recognizing what was gained. And as you move through the early 20th century, the scent of flowers still sweet, but no longer carrying the weight of entire conversations, you feel the quiet acceptance of cultural change. The language of flowers hasn't vanished. It's simply found a new place in a world that speaks more directly, that values clarity alongside beauty, that can appreciate a bouquet for its fragrance and form without needing to decode every stem. You can almost hear the soft ring of a telephone in the distance, the gentle hum of a changing world, and you understand how even the most elaborate codes eventually yield to the human desire for connection that's both beautiful and clear. You settle into the rhythm of a society where tradition and modernity coexist, where the echoes of floriography still shape how we choose our flowers, even if we no longer consult the dictionaries, and you prepare to carry this knowledge forward into the final section of our journey, where we'll explore how fragments of this Victorian code still whisper through our modern romantic gestures. From Valentine's roses to bridal bouquets, one lingering petal at a time, you stand in a modern flower shop, the air conditioning humming softly overhead, and you watch as a customer selects a dozen long-stemmed red roses without hesitation, without consulting a dictionary, without weighing the symbolic nuance of each bloom. And yet, in that simple act, you can feel the ghost of Victorian floriography lingering like the faint scent of rosewater on old paper. You realize that even though we no longer memorize floral dictionaries or practice the intricate grammar of tussie-mussies, fragments of that silent language still shape how we communicate with flowers today, whispering through our Valentine's Day traditions, our wedding bouquets, our sympathy arrangements, one lingering petal at a time. Mainstream historical records show that many of the floral associations popularized in Victorian England, red roses for romantic love, white lilies for purity, ivy for fidelity, have persisted into contemporary culture, not as a formal code, but as a shared cultural intuition that guides our floral choices even when we can't articulate why. You notice how Valentine's Day has become the most visible heir to Victorian floriography, a global celebration where millions of people express affection through flowers, whose meanings were codified over a century ago. When you send red roses on February 14th, you're participating in a tradition that stretches back to those Victorian parlours, where a single bloom could carry the weight of a sonnet, even if you've never opened a floral dictionary or considered the symbolic difference between a crimson and a coral rose. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some modern florists reportedly still receive requests for Victorian-style bouquets around Valentine's Day, with customers asking for arrangements that follow period-appropriate symbolic combinations, a practice that suggests the old code still holds romantic appeal even in our direct, digital age. You can almost hear the soft rustle of tissue paper as a florist carefully composes a bouquet with intentional symbolism, bridging past and present in a gesture that feels both timeless and timely. You settle deeper into the modern echoes of floral language, learning that wedding traditions carry some of the strongest remnants of Victorian floriography. The bridal bouquet, once a carefully composed floral sentence, signaling hopes for fidelity, happiness, and enduring love, still features many of the same blooms Victorians favoured: myrtle for marital love, orange blossoms for purity, ivy for fidelity. Historians still argue whether these continuities represent genuine cultural transmission or simply the enduring aesthetic appeal of certain flowers. But either way, the symbolic weight of wedding florals persists even as the explicit code has faded. You can almost feel the weight of a bridal bouquet in your hands, its fragrance wrapping around you like a promise, understanding that even when we don't consciously decode its meaning, we still feel the resonance of traditions that stretch back through generations. You trace the imaginary line from Victorian parlour to modern social media, noticing how digital culture has created new spaces for floral symbolism to evolve. When someone posts a photo of a sunflower on Instagram with a caption about loyalty and adoration, they're participating in a form of floral communication that echoes Victorian practices, even if the medium has changed from pressed petals to pixels. And here's the gentle irony. A system designed for intimate, face-to-face communication has found new life in the public, performative space of social media, where floral gestures can be both personal and broadcast, both sincere and curated. You can almost hear the soft tap of a phone screen as someone selects the perfect floral photo to share, the quiet satisfaction of expressing feeling through an image that carries cultural weight beyond its visual beauty. You notice how sympathy and memorial flowers still carry strong symbolic associations that trace back to Victorian conventions. White lilies for restored innocence, roses for love and respect, chrysanthemums for truth. These meanings persist in contemporary funeral floristry, offering a vocabulary of comfort that doesn't require words. Mainstream historical records show that many modern florists receive training in traditional floral symbolism, precisely because customers still seek arrangements that convey specific sentiments, even if they can't name the historical source of those associations. You appreciate how this continuity provides a kind of emotional shorthand in moments when words fail, a way to express complex feelings through the universal language of flowers. You settle into the ritual of selecting flowers for a modern occasion, the quiet concentration of choosing blooms that feel right for the moment, even if you can't articulate exactly why. A sprig of lavender for calm, a cluster of white roses for reverence, a branch of olive for peace, each choice guided by intuition that's been shaped by centuries of cultural association. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Some contemporary floral influencers on social media have begun reviving Victorian-style floral dictionaries as content, teaching followers to compose symbolic bouquets for modern occasions, a practice that suggests the old code still holds creative and romantic appeal for new generations. You can almost feel the excitement of discovering that a 19th century manual can still inspire 21st century creativity, that the language of flowers remains flexible enough to evolve while retaining its core charm. You notice how the persistence of floral symbolism reflects broader human needs that transcend historical periods, the desire to express emotion beautifully, to communicate without words, to find meaning in the natural world. Victorian floriography didn't invent these impulses. It simply gave them a particularly elaborate form that resonated with its cultural moment. Historians still argue whether the modern fragments of floral language represent a meaningful continuation of Victorian practices, or simply a superficial borrowing of aesthetic elements. But either way, the fact that we still turn to flowers to mark life's significant moments suggests that the core impulse behind floriography remains deeply human. You can feel both truths as you hold a bouquet, appreciating the historical echoes, while recognizing that your own emotional relationship with flowers is uniquely yours. You settle deeper into the understanding that the legacy of Victorian floriography isn't just about specific meanings. It's about the idea that flowers can carry emotion, that beauty can be meaningful, that nature can help us express what words struggle to contain. When you choose flowers for someone you care about, you're participating in a tradition that stretches back through Victorian parlours, Ottoman gardens, and beyond, even if you're not consciously following a code. Mainstream historical records show that floral symbolism has appeared in cultures across time and geography, suggesting that the impulse to find meaning in blooms is a persistent human tendency that the Victorians simply refined into an elaborate system. You appreciate how this broader perspective enriches your appreciation of both historical and contemporary floral gestures. You notice how the modern revival of interest in Victorian aesthetics, from period dramas to vintage-inspired weddings, has brought renewed attention to floriography as both historical curiosity and creative inspiration. When a contemporary couple chooses to incorporate Victorian floral symbolism into their wedding, they're not just recreating a historical practice. They're engaging with a form of communication that feels both romantic and meaningful in a digital age. And here's the scholarly debate that lingers. Some cultural commentators suggest that the revival of elaborate symbolic practices like floriography reflects a contemporary longing for more nuanced, intentional forms of communication in an era of quick texts and emoji, while others contend it's simply aesthetic nostalgia without deeper cultural significance. You can feel both possibilities as you consider your own relationship with floral symbolism, appreciating the beauty of the tradition while recognizing that its meaning is ultimately what you make of it. And as you step out of the flower shop, your bouquet wrapped in simple paper, its fragrance wrapping around you like a gentle embrace, you feel the quiet continuity of a tradition that has adapted across centuries. The language of flowers hasn't survived unchanged. It has evolved, fragmented, persisted in echoes and intuitions, but its core promise remains: that beauty can carry meaning, that nature can help us express what words cannot, that even in a world of direct communication, there's still value in the subtle, the symbolic, the silently spoken. You can almost hear the soft rustle of petals as you walk, the gentle hum of a world that still turns to flowers for comfort, celebration and connection. And you understand that the Victorian obsession with floral language wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was an expression of a deeply human impulse that still whispers through our modern gestures. One petal, one bouquet, one quiet intention at a time. Now let the weight of the day soften around you, like petals settling after a gentle breeze. The garden is quiet now, the last light fading over the hedges, the scent of roses and lavender lingering in the cool evening air. You've wandered through centuries of silent conversations, through parlours and conservatories, through the delicate dance of meaning carried on stems and leaves. And now there's nothing left to decode, nothing left to arrange, just the soft rhythm of your breath, the gentle hum of the fan in the corner, the comforting knowledge that some messages don't need words to be understood. Let your thoughts drift like pollen on still air, light and unhurried. The flowers have said what they needed to say. The code has been read, the story has been told, and now there is only rest. Feel the softness of your pillow, the warmth of your blankets, the quiet safety of this moment. Tomorrow can wait. For now there is only this gentle descent into sleep, carried on the faint, sweet fragrance of a language that spoke without sound, and still whispers softly, "In your dreams, end of script, sweet dreams."